Hello everyone, I am the Desert Gardener, and today we're going to be transplanting our pepper plants. We're also going to be talking about why desert gardeners should plant their peppers in containers and their tomatoes in the garden, as well as what sort of containers to buy, what size, and what container mix to put in them. So I've got my tea, let's get started. Let's get right off by answering those questions. Why do I think desert gardeners should put their peppers in containers? Now there are two reasons, and the first one is bugs. Now normally in other parts of the world people have to worry more about their tomato plants. Here in the desert there's not a lot of bugs that are going to bother them. I've never had any real issue with bugs with my tomatoes. But peppers are a real problem. There are a number of creepy crawly bugs that will devour your pepper plants pretty quickly here in the desert. So putting them in a container is very important. So what I do is I put them on a concrete patio here in my backyard, and then I use a normal bug spray like this one here, and I simply spray on the concrete around the outside of the container. Now, it doesn't matter what sort of bug spray you use, because we're not going to be spraying it on the plant or on the soil or even on the container, only on the concrete around the outside, kind of making a moat. And the creepy crawly bugs will simply not be able to get to them. Now there are only a few flying bugs we have to worry about, and they don't come until later in the season, so we'll talk about that later. The other reason is the sun. Now in other parts of the world that's not a problem. Most other YouTubers will recommend that you put your pepper plants in full sun, somewhere where they'll get 6 to 8 hours of full sun. Well, that's fine in other parts of the world, but not here. Once it gets over 100, that's just going to devastate the plant. So being able to pick the container up and move it into the shade is going to be a big help. In fact, in the hottest part of the summer, when it's 110 every afternoon, I have my peppers in a place where they'll only get about 4 hours of morning sun, and then they're in the shade getting only indirect sun after that, and this seems to work pretty well. So the next reason, or the next thing we need to do, is we need to figure out what sort of container we're going to be using. Now, I really don't like these plastic containers. They're black. Black absorbs heat. They're also plastic. Plastic will hold the heat in. I really don't think these are a good idea. They're fine for indoors, but not for outdoors in the desert. I do, however, recommend the gray felt containers. These are really great. They're not black, so they're not absorbing the heat. They're a fabric, so they don't hold the heat in. This is just simply much better for the desert. In fact, I think it's really a much better container anywhere. Not only do they have handles, but these non-woven felt fabrics pots are really sort of the next technology in containers. Because what happens with the plastic containers is when the root gets to the inside edge, it makes a left turn and starts going around and around. That's not really good for the plant. However, here, when it hits the inside edge, it'll try to work its way through. It'll be exposed to light, exposed to the oxygen, and it'll self-prune. And that, in which case, it'll start creating a new root. So you end up with a root ball that has a number of more but shorter roots. This is better for the plant. It'll be able to get to more places inside the pot and absorb more water and nutrients. So it's really the better way to go. So what size of a container should you use? Now, the obvious answer is the bigger the better. The problem with that is the larger the container is, the more expensive it's going to be. The container is going to be more expensive. The potting mix that you put inside is going to cost more because you're using more, not to mention the weight. It's going to be harder to pick up and move around. So you want to weigh those options. Now, I did some tests last year. I planted some peppers in a 2-gallon container, and they were definitely a bit stunted. It simply wasn't large enough. And I planted a number in a 3-gallon container like this one here, and they did pretty well. And of course, 5-gallon is even better, but then you start running into a bit more cost. And then once you get to 7 and 10, I think it's really unnecessary, because peppers have a relatively small root ball, unlike tomatoes that are much larger. So if you were planting tomatoes, you really would need a 5, 7, or 10-gallon container. But with peppers, 3 to 5 is really sufficient. So you can make your own decision on whether you're okay with lifting them, whether you're okay with the extra cost. But I'm going with 3 gallons this year, since that works pretty well for me. Here in the desert, when it gets really hot, the plants are going to slow their growth anyway, so we don't really have to worry about a really large container. Now, what sort of potting mix should you choose? Now, if you ask 12 people this question, you're probably going to get 12 different answers, and there's not a huge difference, but there is definitely some rules of thumb you should keep in mind here. Now, I'm going to go with a Miracle-Gro Performance Organics. Now, there's a couple reasons I chose this one. The first one is it's an organic. Second is it's the cheapest one I could find, where the first ingredient is peat moss, and that's really important. A lot of the really inexpensive brands, the first ingredient is forest products. Now, that's just basically code for ground hardwood, and that does not hold water very well. You're going to water your plants, it's going to run right out the bottom, and in the heat of the summer, you're just going to have to water again 2, maybe 3 times a day. It's not going to be healthy for the plant. You need something with peat moss or something similar to that that will hold the moisture in, and that brand really is the cheapest one I could find, where peat moss was the first ingredient, and that's very important. Now, it doesn't matter really what the other ingredients are. Forest products are fine as long as it's the second or third ingredient, that's fine. Now, you could go with the higher end brands like the Fox Farm. That stuff is really fantastic. Unfortunately, it's quite expensive. The Miracle-Gro was only about $10 per cubic foot, where the Fox Farm is close to 40. So you can see, if you have a lot of containers to fill, especially if there are larger containers, it's going to start getting expensive pretty quick. So the cheapest thing you can find, where the first ingredient is peat moss, is really the way to go. However, we are going to be adding some stuff to it. So I've got a container right here, and I've already filled it about halfway up with our container mix. The first thing I'm going to add is compost. So I'm going to fill the container almost all the way up with compost. Now, compost is really great for a couple of different reasons. First off, it's going to provide a lot of nutrients to the plant. Second, it's going to provide a lot of the microbiology that we need. See, when you plant things in your garden, there's a whole microbiology that exists in your soil. Your soil is alive, but potting soil is not. So when you add your granular fertilizer, there's nothing there to break it down. So it'll take a much longer period of time for that fertilizer to break down to become something that the plant can absorb. So the compost is an important step. Now, speaking of fertilizer, we're going to also add some azomite. Now, this provides micronutrients. Now, again, your garden soil has lots of micronutrients. Again, your potting soil does not. Things like boron and zinc and manganese, things like that, they just simply are not in most common potting soils. So we're going to have to add that ourselves. So we're going to put 1 tablespoon for each gallon of the container. So this is a 3-gallon container, so I'm going to put 3 tablespoons. There we go. And the next thing we're going to put is some perlite. So the peat moss in the potting soil is going to hold moisture, but the perlite is going to create spaces for the root to go and allow drainage. You need that delicate balance between holding enough moisture and holding too much moisture. And adding those two things together is really important. So I am going to do one big handful per gallon of the container. So 3. And then we're going to mix it up real good. And I'll probably speed this up for you. And there you go. This looks great. Now, if you're planning on using a granular fertilizer, this is a good time to add that too. Mix that in and mix it up real well in the soil. You don't want it all in one place. You want to mix it in so it's everywhere inside the container. Now, I'm going to be using a liquid fertilizer, so I'm going to be adding that later. So now it's time to grab our plant and pot this thing up. So we're just going to dig in there and get a space about the size of the container. I'll massage it a little bit to loosen it up. We're going to try not to grab the stem too hard, as that can damage things. We're going to turn it upside down and plop it in. And we just simply mix the soil around it. Now we can add more soil if we think we need to. And here we're going to add our liquid fertilizer. So this will water and fertilize at the same time. And in case you're wondering, I'm using Kellogg's Organic Fish and Kelp Fertilizer. I like it better than the Alaska stuff. It's a more even 222 NPK, as well as it doesn't smell as bad. Then we're going to take our clothespin. This is going to be a purple bell pepper. I'm going to clip it on, and then I'm going to move it over to the patio, and I got about 40 more of these to do. And then when I'm all done, I'm going to grab my bug spray, create a little moat around the outside, and we should be good. I'm going to put them in full sun for now, since it's springtime. And like I said before, once it gets hot, I'll be moving them someplace where they're going to get only morning sun and shade the rest of the day. All right, that's about it. We're going to be planting our peppers here, or our tomatoes in the garden here soon. And we've still got some Mythbuster videos to do. So if you liked it, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Hi guys, I forgot to mention one thing, so I'm going to add this quick little edit. Now, what about mulch? Now, mulching containers in the desert is actually very important. The reason I didn't add any now is because it's springtime and it's really not very hot, so it's unnecessary. But once it starts getting really hot, I will most likely add some mulch to this. Now, what kind of mulch do you need? Well, you can use pretty much anything. Straw, shredded newspaper, leaves, grass, or probably the best one is wood chips. As long as it's wood chips that haven't been colored, or they're not made from some sort of scented wood. So your uncolored bark should be fine, because they'll decompose and actually provide a little nutrients. But once it starts getting really hot, that can be important. But right now in the springtime, it's really not a big deal. That's why I don't put any now. And I left a little space so I can add some then. So I think that's about it. If you have any questions, you can leave them down below. I'll try to answer them later. Got a bunch of other videos planned and will be coming soon. I'll see you then.